Today's topic is politics and collage, and we welcome you to put your comments or questions in the chat, as well as to use the Q&A function. And Gretchen, who will be moderating this forum, will be sure to get to them at the end of the presentation from the panelists. And I just want to say a few words before I duck out and become an audience member myself. You know, why politics and collage? And here's my take on that. And this is really why this topic was important to us at Collage. The issues facing humanity in the 21st century are difficult and complex. They are not easy to understand in a rational, intellectual way, and they're even more difficult to understand on an emotional and spiritual level. Our politics, our civic discourse, it's kind of a mess right now, particularly in America, but also in other parts of the world as well. And I think this is one of the real challenges we're facing over the next decade. And the thing is, a climate scientist can tell us precisely what's going on with our environment and lay out the possible consequences, but they can't make us grok necessarily the complexity of climate change. A social scientist can give us facts and figures about homelessness. A health researcher can present us studies about how systemic racism physically impacts people of color, but what they can't do is ultimately teach us how to care about people, because that's art's job. The job of art is to give us an experience of the world, to help us understand the world on an irrational, emotional, or spiritual level. And when we can do that, when we can do that work of engaging the world in that way, that's when we get to pause, we get to think with our hearts as well as our minds, and we open ourselves up to understanding the experiences of others. That's where we start caring. That's why I believe this work is important, that ultimately art done well, political art done well, can help us be better people. But here's the problem. A lot of political art is not done well. Some of it is a little cringy. It can promote a sense of cynicism. And that's why politics and collage and the work these artists and Gretchen have been doing was so important. Because through a series of residencies, by bringing together a community of artists to support each other, they were finding ways to tackle this important genre. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Gretchen. Please run with it.
I love it, Rick.
Everybody.
It's such a brilliant opener, and what I love about the way that you talk and the way you describe politics and art is you really relate how what we're doing matters. Because I think one of the things that's really tricky with making political art is you're like, oh, I made a thing, I'm going to change the world, let me put it in my closet for a while. And what was really great about these residencies and interacting with these 25 absolutely brilliant artists, as well as the guest speakers, of which Rick was one of them, is it really brought home sort of the relevancy and the importance of political art, even if you make it and it ends up in your closet, let alone if you make it and it becomes a zine, I think is what the kids say, or if it goes on Instagram, wherever it goes, if it's out in the world, it can make an impact and it can make a difference. And collage in particular, what I love about collage as a political art form, and you guys have heard me talk about this for forever, so hello new attendees who have not heard my spiel yet. Collage is this amazing ability to bring these really complicated issues that Rick was talking about and put them together in really interesting, nuanced ways where we can have a conversation that is more nuanced and more interesting than just X is bad, X is good. And maybe X is bad. Systemic racism, I think we can agree, is bad. At the same time, the conversations about systemic racism have become very, let's say, tweeted. So what can I say in a sentence? What can I say in a tweet? This is a massive topic. You can't discuss like all of systemic racism and all its nuances and complexities in history in a tweet. Maybe you can't do all of it in one art piece, but at least in one art piece, you can have different aspects of it. You can begin to spark a conversation about it. You can begin to spark a feeling about it. Like Rick was saying, you can begin to spark like empathy and caring about a topic that's not just a textbook definition or a throwaway tweet. And that's what I think the importance of collage as a political art form is, but also political art in general. So Rick, absolutely brilliant. That was exactly the perfect opener. And I'm actually not going to take, well, I guess I should introduce like what this residency was about. So I'm G.E Vogt. I'm a political artist, political collage artist. And this came about really in 2020, of course, when we all had sort of time to think about the art that we were making and its relevancy. And I've always sort of made political art, but what I was noticing in 2020 is a lot more people who usually didn't make social political art were really getting jazzed up to make it. Wanted to know more about it, wanted to know how to make it, and really either didn't know where to start or didn't know if they'd already been making it, didn't know how to progress. So this residency sort of came out of conversations that I was having with different artists about how do we do this? How can I do this? And what does it matter? And of course, my first gut impulse is, of course it matters. And then my next impulse is, ooh, but how can we further this so that people do see that it matters and we can make a difference? And so that's where this residency came about. And so it was a group of two, 12 to 13 each over the course of a couple months. It ran online. So every Sunday we met and had a few guest speakers talk about either the history of political collage, curating political collage, creating political collage, sort of politics in general, as when Rick spoke. And then throughout the week, these poor artists, I tell people what I made these artists do, and everyone's like, you made them do how much work? They did so much work. So on Sundays we met for a 3-hour Zoom, which is a long Zoom, as everyone knows, even though it's wonderful. And then throughout the week, they read articles, they engaged in online discussions, they had to do exercises, sketches in collage to do a final project, which then they had like an extra month to do their final work. And all their final works, you can see, sorry, quick advertising break, you can see in the Politics in Collage catalog, which is chock full of all of their work and their writings, and it's an absolutely beautiful catalog. So we'll have some info on where you can find that afterwards, but it has all their final projects in there. And it was stunning what y'all came up with. I know I tell you how amazing you are all the time, so I'm just going to take the time to do it one more time, because it was incredible. I mean, the topics that they tackled, it was from gender identity to systemic racism to ableism to colonialism. I mean, it was pick an ism. And somebody did a topic on it, and it ranged from God, Phyllis, how big was your work? It was 36 by 36. It was bigger.
Yeah, it was like it was like the biggest that I've actually ever worked in. So yeah,
huge. It was Amanda made a moving sculpture. She made an interactive assemblage. At one point, she emailed me and Christopher, and she was like, "This is what I'm doing. Is it collage?" And I'm like, I don't know. And Christopher's like, yes, do it. You have to. I mean, just the range of what they did. Both Mary Hope and Alex, you both started with one piece, and then by the end you're like, okay, so it's a triptych now. And I'm like, great, make more. Penny, you as well started with one. You're like, I made a bunch, I might make a quilt. And I'm like, great. I'm like, it was phenomenal what these guys did. So this is a small group of our artists who are, I'm going to turn it over to them to speak about their work and their process. But real quick, thank you so much for joining us and for watching and being invested in and interested in political art. We're excited to have you and to talk about this. So I think that was sort of the basis. I may just pick someone, and if you want to talk about, I'll sort of like leave it a broad question. If you want to talk about your work and process and how this residency sort of influenced it, that would be fantastic. Penny, you're in my upper screen. Do you want to start? Am I putting you on the spot?
Well, just tell me if I'm taking too long, tell me to,
All right, I will. Well, real quick, Christopher, this is about an hour, right? An hour and a half?
About an hour. If we go over an hour a little bit, that's okay, but we try to stick to the hour.
Okay.
Perfect. Okay, so I won't let you go longer than 7 minutes.
Okay. No problem.
Wanted to say,
if I even go that far.
We put a link in the chat to the online exhibition. So if you want to take a look at these lovely artists' work while they talk about it, you can follow along at home.
I'll try to hold up some pictures as well. So this is some of Penny's work.
Okay. I guess I should start with why or how I was so intrigued by this residency for a number of reasons. I've been doing political collage for on and off for a number of years. And to be in a community of extraordinary artists and have an opportunity to talk about the work we make, and whether it was somebody who's just entering into the arena or some of us who've been doing it for a while, was just tremendous. And I look forward to continuing conversations in the future. Briefly, I had made I just finished a series of work, of 4-year projects where I made a collage Monday through Saturday from the New York Times to bear witness to President Trump's time in office. At the time that he was elected, I was fairly certain that it would be quite a time in our US history. Little did we know quite how what an impact that his administration would have. So it's really become a historical document. But the thing about doing it, so I did it, which means it was like some 1,200 collages. It was a monumental project. And when I was able to show it here in Pittsburgh in its entirety. And then afterwards, it was sort of like, okay, so I've done that. And although I have ideas for what to do with it in the future, I was very interested in thinking about making work, but I didn't know what. I didn't know. I mean, for those who, I'm not just I don't say just a collage artist, but my work is based in textiles and I make quilts. And so what was so intriguing with me about starting collage was it gave me a moment, a way of making work quickly, to be able to make a statement fast. Because the work that my other part of my art practice takes a very, very long time. And all of my work is social and political commentary. So what was so great about this residency was having the opportunity to listen to historians and think about collage as an art practice through time. But then we were challenged to make work in a way we have not made it before, which for me was like the greatest thing, because the work that I had made before based on one newspaper and basically a mashup of what I saw in the newspaper that day, I decided to go okay, so if I'm making it differently, what am I going to do? And I went the complete opposite direction to it being a very stark, hardly any, a very sort of concentrated image. And my reasoning for doing that was that the urgency of the times, right? So where we are today and what is going on in terms of the questioning of so many things, the backlash, et cetera, et cetera. Let me back up. We were asked to pick a topic. And so the topic that I picked at that particular time and it was reproductive justice, and looking at the law in Texas that had just been put into place to curtail abortion rights. And this was before Roe v. Wade was ended. So, and then we were challenged to research that topic in depth. And so that's what I'm in the process of doing. And as I learned when I was doing the research, that abortion was used as a galvanizing issue. I think we all come to know that now, to generate political participation in the religious right. And what I've come to learn, and I'm still researching, and it's going to take a long time, is how we got here, and going through the myriad of historical understanding, so that ultimately what I'd like to do is, I feel like let me back up. I feel like what I've learned now is that I need to be really grounded in the history and understanding how we got here, so that it becomes almost a second language, so that I can distill messages that are the collages that you see on the online exhibition that are very to the point. And then I'll just finish by saying that because what I'm trying to do is very quickly with vintage visual, using vintage imagery as well as some contemporary, which I have not done before. And then finding existing text, not actually creating my own, because what you find if you look in vintage magazines in the 40s and 50s, in the 30s, or even into the 60s, there's a lot about the separation between church and state. And so that's kind of where I'm going. Just trying, and underneath all of this is the maintenance of white supremacy. So it just, anyway, I don't know if that makes sense, but because I'm kind of in the middle of it, as you, that's where I am.
And you bring up a couple amazing things that, you know, was one of the major focuses of this residency when we were talking about how to make political art. And it goes to what, you know, Rick was saying at the beginning, is how do we make something that isn't just cringy? And what I've landed on with my own work that I sort of really pushed to the artists, is like, you will learn my process, is research. And research can be, you know, a lot of us took that to be like articles and documentaries and you know, reading research, but research can even be music, it can be poetry, it can be other art, other artists who have sort of worked in this topic before. And so what I loved about Penny's work is she went from already doing a really heavily researched series project, the New York Times project of one, you know, collage a day based on that day's paper, into a completely different kind of research of, let me research the history of this topic, as well as articles specifically about this topic, texts specifically about this topic, vintage imagery that, you know, can relate to this topic. And so your research really changed, because you were the ones who was already kind of doing research before this residency, and then it changed, which I think influenced your work as well. Like when you had to go from this massive information of this topic into, how do I distill this down? How do I make this into, you know, a coherent thing?
Mm-hmm.
Which was a huge transition for you.
And it's much harder. It's like so much harder.
Yes. Yeah. So no, I mean, it was really exciting to see your process, and particularly to see how the research influenced your process. Because towards the end, you're beginning to say, oh, here's all this that I'm finding about how reproductive rights are connected with white supremacy. And you were like, I don't think I can get that into this part of the project, but you've told me before personally, I think,
oh yeah,
and that's what a lot of this research does. It shows how a lot of these topics aren't just one thing. Reproductive rights is not just, you know, yes abortion, no abortion. There's a history to it, and it's connected to other sort of complex issues.
The only other thing I'll say is that this is just the beginning of this series of collages. I am going to continue making them in this way. I just had to, I'm just doing a lot of research, right? But yeah, so.
Yes.
Thank you.
No, thank you, Penny. Anyone jumping to go at the bit next? Well, actually, Mary Hope, would you mind going next, because you did research in a different way. Yours came from a very personal place, and then went somewhere. So, do you want to take it away? I'll find you.
How did I know you were going to do that?
Empathy. I've been practicing.
Oh, well, I'm Mary Hope Lee. I live in Phoenix, Arizona, and I started experimenting with collage in the early 70s, and it's been an art form it's been a medium that I've come back to time and again, because for much of my life, I was very peripatetic. And so being a collage artist, for me, materials was a challenge, because you have to have things to, I mean, look at Penny's amazing studio there. I've never had a studio. And so every time I came time to move, it was like, what am I going to do with all these things? And so I would donate them to teachers' resource centers, which made me feel good. And then time would pass, and then I would come back to it, and I would accumulate things, and it would be time to move again. And so So I'm not sure why I said that, but as a way of history, okay, as a way of coming back to the practice this time, and I'm not going anywhere. I don't care how problematic materials are. This is it, and I'm going to make the most of it as long as I possibly can. And Collage Magazine, Collage Institute has been really helpful in giving me a sense of myself as an artist. And I came by my topic. Gretchen wanted me to mention that. And as a way of responding to what Rick said, how to care about people. And I live in Phoenix. You think, and a friend of mine who lives closer to the border said that in Nogales, said that the price of rental housing in Phoenix is criminal. And I say that with a capital C. And so I'm living on Social Security and a part-time job. And so every day I wonder, how long is this gonna last? How sustainable can this be? What are the kinds of ways can I make money? And I was observing how the homeless population, the unsheltered folks have been growing steadily here in Phoenix. In the desert of all places, people are dying on the streets right now. And how I can make people see and then see differently. So that was my topic for the residency. And my favorite part was the art history. It's like, where did political collage begin? Who was doing it and why? And it was the Dadaists and was anti-Nazis. And I said, yes, my people. And that gave me, that was another check saying, yes, you belong here. This is what you should be doing. And one of the skills I learned was from Gretchen, and everybody groaned when she said this, was like, I want you to make sketches. And everybody going, sketches? How do you make sketches with collage? How do you do that? And so she explained it and we understood it. And I really enjoyed it because I didn't feel like I had to sit down and do something all of a piece all at once. I could play with it. And she asked us to present, to work with, to pick three to five elements and then switch them around and then, scan them and then see what they all look like. And then you can see what works and what doesn't work and in what proportion and how and why. And so thank you for that, Gretchen. It has changed the way I handle my materials.
Mary Hope, thank you, because I know everyone was a little sort of like at first like, what do you mean? And it was essentially, really sort of getting us out. And I'm not sure about you guys, but with my collage work, it's easy for me to get in a rut and to create the same way. I do this step and then I do this step and then I do this step. And I like my work, but that creative rut can make it almost restrictive.
Yes, it does.
And so with the sketches, what I loved with you, Mary Hope, is you really just sort of like went for it. And one of the exercises, like you said, was pick 3 to 5 elements and use them in different ways to tell a story about your topic. God, I don't even remember the other ones. That's bad. I think there was one where it's like, do something completely different. So if you usually use a lot of text, don't use any text. If you're usually very maximalist, be minimalist. And so your work really, from your application where I got to see like your portfolio versus what it is now, you really went from using a lot of elements to just using then like a few elements really really intensely. I mean, do you want to talk about like the work that you made while I hold it up?
Okay, on the I guess it's your left looking at the screen, I think, is what looks like a very swanky bathroom in some very expensive house somewhere out in the desert, in the northern Sonoran desert, where very few people live, except some really, really rich folks. And so I got a number of these images from Phoenix Home and Garden. And this gives me a chance to mention Martha Rossler, who I learned about through the residency. And that too was a very affirming thing, because I had an idea what I wanted to do. I wanted my images to be stark, and I wanted the contrast to jar. And then Rick mentioned Martha Rossler, and I went to look her up, and I went, oh my goodness, I'm in dialogue with her and I didn't even know it. And so what I did was I cut out the window in that bathroom photograph, and outside that window was this gorgeous manicured desert scene. You know, it's like, oh, who wouldn't want to lie in a big bathtub like that and look out the window and be all comfortable and not worry about the heat? And then I found this image of a person lying on the street in what looks like Times Square, and it's protecting their personhood with a U.S. Postal Service basket for mail. And I put that in the window. And then on the upper right, there is, oh yes, I saw this image of this young woman who, with that beautiful sign, and some of the signs, some of the titles for my collages come from signs, because I looked at as many of those cardboard signs as I could find. And so that's where some of the titles for my pieces come from. And, but she's holding this sign, and there was this, again, this really amazing bedroom in one of those magazines. And where you see the person walking away on the street, there was a huge horse's head portrait there. So I cut that out and I put that person there, and I sat the young woman on the bed. And that's Not a Sleepover is the title of that piece. And below that is an image that I found in a European focused, home and garden kind of magazine. And up on the upper left, it says Benvenuti a casa, which means welcome home. And we've got these tennis players having fun. And then there's this person, which you may not see right away, sitting on the sofa. And one of the signs that I saw said, "Have you ever felt invisible before?" And so it's gone back and forth, but have you ever felt invisible before? And then in parentheses, welcome home. And that's how that triptych came about.
Yeah. And that, I mean, yours really came out of your exercises, because you could really see the process of the sketches and begin to shift until I think you were one of the ones that there were some that needed the month after the residency was over to really sort of distill what they were doing. And I think you were the ones that was pretty well like, no, I think I nearly have it with some adjustments. I mean, you really found a process, and then just like,
and I made more images after that too.
I remember. Yes.
Yeah. So I have about
That's
10.
That's great.
Yeah, and I want to put them on billboards with the captions in very obvious places and project them onto the sides of government buildings and construction sites.
Okay, I'm going to send you some information.
Thank you.
What I love about hearing your work after and Penny's work after as well is you can see that like this residency, and I'm not trying to talk up, look how great this residency was, but stuff like this where we sort of push ourselves to learn more about our art and the kind of art that we're interested in, is that it keeps going then. I mean, a lot of these projects, there's so much meat to these topics, there's so much information, there's so much to sort of like explore and dissect, that I think what a lot of artists found during this residency was, like I mentioned before, you can't really contain it in one piece, or if you do, then it becomes a series, it becomes multiple pieces, or like Phyllis, the pieces become huge. And so just the way that you guys sort of pushed yourselves into, now that I've done all this research and I have all this information, and I have this sort of process, it just keeps going. Like you almost can't stop in a very good way. Please. Yeah.
I want to mention one more thing. In Penny's studio, behind her is Martha Rossler's book, Bringing Home the War.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Full circle.
Look the other way.
Full circle.
There it is.
I love this. So I'm going to transition, Mary Hope, if you don't mind, I'm going to transition to Phyllis, since I kind of did anyway, because you had such a huge piece in it. You had a huge topic as well.
Yeah. And I did not do a lot of political collage work. A lot of my work was very abstract and personal. So, but I had, all these feelings as what was going on in the country and what was happening. And I had all this emotion, brewing inside of me. And that's why I took this workshop, because I felt I wanted it to center me. I wanted to do something political. I had done a few things political, but I felt like I wanted to be around other people doing political, work, and learn how to focus, on what it was and how to integrate my own personal experience into what I was feeling, the emotion, things that were happening in the country, especially around George Floyd's murder in the summer of 2020, and all that stuff that was happening. So, and it did. It was an amazing experience. And the piece that I did was about redlining. So, and the thing about, the research, discovering all this unbelievable history having to do with that. This redlining, which, if you don't know, just very briefly, it was red lines were drawn around maps, distinguishing neighborhoods that were based on racial makeup. So they distinguished and they drew a red line around all African-American neighborhoods or people of color neighborhoods. And those neighborhoods were not given the services and loans and financing that other neighborhoods were given. So it was this systemic racism that so much has built up over the years. And this started back in the 1930s. So my personal experience was as a child growing up in an apartment building complex, which were co-op apartments. A lot of people were able to afford their apartment because they were able to get loans from the GI Bill. Right across the street was another apartment building complex that were rental units and were mostly African Americans. My apartment building complex was mostly whites, and you could see the difference between the two. And I was aware of this as a young kid. And I was very aware because I grew up in the time of busing. So in 1964, and I was 12 years old, we were bused. Even though the Black neighborhood started across the street, the schools were further away. So we were bused into that neighborhood. And there was a lot of political stuff going on about that. So I was able to take all of this, all of sort of what I guess I call my childhood as a white witness, and put it out there as a personal statement, and that's what I did. I basically took these pictures from vintage magazines, from House Beautiful from the 1950s and Life magazine from the 1950s, and of advertisements of people, of white faces smiling and having a good time. And then you have these maps of redlining and other things going on there. And I took this very bold statement and put it right there, because nobody really wanted to talk about it. Nobody wanted to, nobody wants to admit that this was part of their lives. They turned away from it. And I wanted to make a statement with that. And this workshop was amazing. It really, really kind of focused me, in order to figure out what it was and how I wanted to say something without being too broad, too in your face, even though it's still from my personal point of view as a white person. I'm kind of holding up the hypocrisies. That's what I'm trying to do of the white liberal community, Yeah.
And that was
So-
something that, we really talked a lot about, is how, your personal experience is sort of the basis for this piece, because otherwise, what we talked a lot about really difficult topics in this residency. And I think that was one of the really exciting but really challenging things, was like, are there topics that are off limits? As a white person, can I make a thing about racism? That's not really my story to tell. So should I? What's my responsibility? Like we really sort of dug into the ethics of political art, particularly like from your own prism, whatever your prism is. And so Phyllis, that was one thing that we really sort of like dug into with you, is sort of like having observed redlining in really tangible ways as a kid, ways that still affect you now. How can you tell that particular perspective in this piece? So it's not a piece about like, look how horrible redlining is, but it's really about, like what you said, the complicity of the white people involved, even indirectly in redlining, let alone directly. And do you want to talk about the text that you use? I don't know if people can see it here. It says, "We want white tenants in our white communities." Do you want to talk about that text that you used?
Yeah, that was an actual sign that came, that it was an actual sign put up. I think it might have been in Chicago in 1946. Also facing an apartment building, a Black apartment building complex in Chicago. And it was so striking because that is so in your face, where a lot of liberal white people, they would, oh my God, I'd never say something like that, but right. But going along with it, moving to the suburbs, it's all kind of, it's back there, it's all back there. And even though people won't talk about it, we're all part of that, and we all have a responsibility in that, and a responsibility in learning about this and knowing about it and understanding what happened, and how we played a role in it, how as white people, so.
Yeah, and how we still benefit, how white people still benefit.
Totally.
Even if they don't see it or recognize it. And that was, one of the really exciting things about your work then, as well, and it sort of goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning, is it really sparks dialogue, it sparks conversation. So if as a white person you've never heard of redlining, or you don't realize how maybe families benefited from it, or were sort of destroyed by it, then a piece like this, with all its different nuances, the different torn bits and destructed bits, how all that sort of begins to spark this dialogue of what a complex, nuanced, historical and contemporary subject it is. There's a lot to unpack in one thing that you can say in a definition. Redlining is X, but it's so much more than that. And that's what I really appreciated about your piece, is just sort of that ability to bring these nuances together, which is, I feel like, why it got huge, because it didn't start out so big, did it?
No, and when you asked to do a sketch, it was like, oh my God, I've never done a sketch for a piece in my life, because part of my art practice is working spontaneously, and so I did this sketch and I did it, and you said work in a way that was totally different. So I worked digitally rather than analog, and though I had done digital stuff a long time ago, I hadn't done it in quite a while. So I made this piece and I was pretty happy with it. And then I tried to, transfer that piece onto an analog collage. And I was having a lot of trouble, just a lot of trouble. So, and I felt it. Yeah. And I did. And once I did that, it really came through, because there was a lot of emotion, there, so, and I think all these political things that are going on are it touches such an emotional chord, and
Well, that's actually a perfect transition, if you don't mind, Phyllis, for me to transition into Alex, because Alex, you as well. Do you like how I'm like, I'm picking on you next? Because you as well went from a really personal, emotional point. Well, you started a little more sort of like a broader topic, and then you sort of like dug into your emotional and personal connection to it, and that sort of changed your
Yeah.
whole work. Do you want to talk about?
Yeah, so my like initial attempt didn't actually like make it into the final series. It's something that I think I was trying to define a particular historical period in a particular place. And so like I'm used to generating work intuitively. I think that's just a sort of natural part of collage. So there was like an interesting paradigm shift that was like presented by this residency. These sort of like assignments to sketch things out, or to base our work on research. I mean, the sketching really, part of that has to do with like, you know, what forms do you want included? What is your composition? And I had never thought about collage as I assume like a painter might think about the painting. And so there's also this idea that Rick mentioned early on, this like cynicism that can crop up in like maybe simpler political art. And so that was something that I was recognizing in that initial piece that I did, because I had wanted to capture this like facet of the history that I thought was interesting, that dealt with like complicity. And so part of my work dealt with like pogroms in Eastern Europe and persecution of Jewish people by Russians before World War II, and then also the Holocaust in World War II. And so it was not personal at first. I was using this archive and chronicle of this shtetl that my family's from in Lithuania called Ishishuk. And I was creating a narrative, which is more, I'm also a writer, and so I'm used to just like crafting fiction. But it really, everything clicked for me when I just went straight to family. I was like, okay, what am I actually trying to do here? I want to represent something that is, there's sort of a through line through time from the past to the present. I'm like, how am I represented in this work? How is it personal? And so this work at the bottom here, you know, I have a photo of like an heirloom from my grandmother. I have a picture of my great-great-grandparents. There's this sort of historical context that frames the work. But ultimately there are these various, like this sort of field of view in which there are these two miniatures held in the palm of this hand, which is like, it's family. So I was interested in these ideas of like heritage and heirlooms and how those affect, you know, our own personal histories. And I think oftentimes like between generations, there's a remove that occurs. And I wanted to kind of stress that this history is a lot closer to us in time than we perceive it. I did the three pieces. There's sort of at the top, there's this representation of community. The center is a sort of individual. That was where I got the name for the series, which is Invented Futures. It's kind of trying to create these alternate histories for people who did not survive this persecution. And then the sort of final piece is the history. So kind of trying to trace these people through time. And that element, that temporal element, as well as the personal element, that was where everything really started to click for me, where I wasn't inventing a narrative, but it became a lot more personal in that way. Yeah.
Which was really exciting because you were struggling with how to take this sort of massive topic and really emotional topic and how to make art with it. And then as soon as you were talking about the book, your grandfather's book, I'm so sorry, shuttle?
Oh, Stettel?
Shuttle.
Yeah. That's a
And how like, sorry, forgive me, I can see it, but I can't say it. But how that book then really sort of made you begin thinking about like how personal this was. And so yours was one of the more, I mean, like all the collages, I think, as you can tell so far, all the projects were personal, but yours was the sort of most like family oriented of the history of your family, but you still made it in a way that was very accessible. As someone who, you know, I don't really know my family's history of immigration or, you know, where we're from or anything, like you can still feel in your work the futures that generations hope to have for their generations, if that makes sense, for their kids and their grandkids and their.
Yeah. And very briefly, there was like a very formative lecture that we had that was on the sort of subject of the image and victimization, and whether or not like this sort of re-victimization occurs. And so I was very careful about the figures that I used and the types of stories that I was telling or suggesting through their usage. So like this initial image, the figures are cut out. They're this sort of community, this group with the map sort of superimposed or like hanging behind them. And so I was just made very conscious about, you know, these figures and how people are portrayed and what ultimately, you know, the history that we choose to tell through our art is very important.
And how we use trauma. I mean, that's something that we really talked about a lot. Like a lot of these topics deal with trauma. You know, redlining's traumatic. Pogroms are traumatic. These are really traumatic topics. And so one of the things that we really talked about was how to work with that, how to use it either deliberately or how to use it in a way that we're acknowledging the trauma without reinforcing it. And so that seemed to really, I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because once you started sort of reworking your thought process around it, particularly in terms of victimization and trauma, your pieces just changed. There was so much more hope in them than I think there was originally. Yeah, which is amazing. Thank you, Alex. And speaking of personal work, Amanda, I'm gonna bring it to you. And I kind of left you for last as well, because Amanda has please, if you're watching, do go to the online exhibition to see Amanda's link to her work, because her work moves. So to show you just pictures of it is not to give you the full sort of like, I don't know, heart of her work. So she has a video up there where she moves the pieces around, and it's just extraordinary. So I just want to hear you talk about it. Amanda, go.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so kind of like already has been mentioned, I came from like a personal avenue that started to be backed by research, and like Mary Hope mentioned, like it has carried on. The residency was just like a kickoff point for my work. Oh, the sketches. Let's talk about the sketches. I struggled with the sketches. What I wanted to convey wasn't happening at all in my sketches. I was getting incredibly frustrated. So my subject of choice at the time it was about online access. So specifically looking at exhibitions and artist talks. So when this residency took place in the UK, you had to book a ticket to go to an in-person event, and there was a huge reduction of online content being shown. So that was whether it was a tour of an exhibition or an artist talk being streamed. It very subtly and very quickly declined. And I was really interested in that because I'm a long-term shilder. So all of my arts access was being just through the internet. I was working remotely as well. So it had a massive impact on me. And the work that I was doing, I had conversations with friends, and we were like, oh, did anyone see so-and-so talks? Like, no, I had no way of seeing it. And this was becoming more and more apparent. So it really spurred on the piece I made, which it's an object. So it's a small box that has moving parts inside. And I mimicked a laptop's setting. So it had a full screen and it had a keypad. So I had the lovely green view at the start, which was like a landscape, and you pulled that back to to reveal different layers. The second one was all about like all these are really annoying cookies and pop-ups that we all have to fight through online. And then the one underneath was like Punch and Judy still, and then one underneath that was lots of text revolving around online access. So like book tickets now, vulnerable person. And I'd pulled out different words I'd found on very prominent galleries in the UK that were keywords being repeated on their websites. So I pulled those out and enlarged them. And then the final one was, I don't know if anyone's had it, but on your computer screen, it had an access denied box that you couldn't move. And it was just stuck right in the middle of the screen that hid a picture of the Royal Academy Summer Exhibition. And you couldn't see the whole image, and that couldn't be removed in the piece. So this object, I really wanted to try and, what I wanted to do is make something that was very annoying to handle and use, and it was about access but was actually quite inaccessible because it's jinky and janky and doesn't work very well. It's not smooth when you pull it apart, bits fall off, trust me, they do. And it was to make it as difficult as possible to get to the final layer, which was what was happening at the time. You know, with me and colleagues that I'd worked with, were trying to get access to online talks or, you know, find exhibitions that we needed for our work, and we just had no way of doing so. And I also wanted to kind of convey that we all have to kind of jump through hoops online, even though we probably don't notice. So that's why I pulled in, you know, the use of the cookies, because they pop up when we don't want them, and, you know, we have no entry signs when we least expect them as well. So that was like the key things I wanted to do. And as mentioned before, like this really kicked off a huge project for me. And from this, I've done a massive survey that was trying to get galleries such as like the Tate to talk about their huge reduction in online access. And actually on Friday just gone, I had done a big presentation at the Tate Modern about access and about how important it is for institutions to still have online access, even though we're supposedly out of the pandemic state now. So yeah, this has really spurred on a huge project for me. So thank you, Gretchen, I think. Yeah, so and I've loved it. But yeah, that was my work. But yeah, there's a little video online that you can see, and it just shows like me removing the slides, so it gives you a better understanding of it. Hopefully it makes sense.
Well, and one thing that you sort of glossed over that I'm going to ask you to go into a little bit deeper is humor. Your project is hilarious. It is so funny. When you sent me this video, I'm laughing so hard. My boyfriend's like, "Oh, it's a cat video." I'm like, no, better than a cat video. Like, I mean, and we didn't really go into the use of humor into political art a lot. But obviously there's a huge history of humor in political art. And I think you were one of the few people who essentially was like, I'm going to take this really horrible topic and make it funny. I mean, do you want to talk about that decision and your process with using humor a bit?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of my work generally uses humor to convey and open up conversation, and that was something I really wanted to do, because this was a nightmare of a topic to talk about. I was struggling with it. It was kind of like me and Gretchen had lots of conversations, and I was getting incredibly frustrated. And I thought, how can I get other people talking about this? Well, if I can make someone laugh, I'm halfway there. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to bring humor in to this work. So one of the humorous sides of it is that there is a Punch and Judy element, and it's got the little theatre cut out, and then you have Punch and Judy, you can actually move, and they hit each other on the head. One has the Mac Wheel of Death, as I call it, and the other one has a loading sign, and you can beat each other up. And it was just it was a play on, you know, things not loading or working as smoothly as they possibly could. But it was a way in, because yeah, if I could make someone laugh, I could open up that conversation and have a start into it. So that was my use. And yeah, it's still, you know, still use that in my work now. Try and make people laugh.
Well, it also made it really, you took a topic, and you and I talked about this a lot, is how to take this topic of accessibility, which most people just sort of take for granted, right? And how to make people who are, you know, who don't deal with a disability, how to make them feel the same frustration of access denied and of accessibility.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to go into, and so that's how you sort of landed on cookies.
Yeah, I mean, so as a person with disabilities, and, you know, a community that has disabilities I work with, it's not often spoken about openly. It's kind of glossed over, and we all have access to lots of different things in the world, but do we have accessibility to them? And they're two very different things. And that's where there's this weird gray area. It's like you'll see in a lot of, I challenge everyone, go and have a look at your local gallery and see what they have on their accessibility page or an access page, and just read the wording and see if you can relate, because there's some really key things in that I have picked up on along the way that's really interesting for everyone. And I think access affects us all. And the way I wanted to challenge that in my work was, this use of cookies, which I find terribly annoying. I'm sure everyone else does. But these like things that pop up on your computer and interject you at the most inappropriate time. And that is what daily life is like for a disabled person. There is obstacles and hurdles that you cannot necessarily avoid or overcome, but they're never spoken about. I mean, cookies are everywhere, so are disabled hurdles. We skim over them, we delete them, get them out of the way, but we never really talk about them, but we all know they're there. So that was the kind of the notion I was making with the cookie page of my work. And again, it was using the cookies was also a way, and I could then use the really stark wording that was being executed on these galleries' websites. So I did pick on the Royal Academy at the time because it was one of the first people that were really, really good during the pandemic for online access, and one of the first galleries to remove nearly everything in a very short amount of time, and replaced it with book an in-person ticket, go and see us in person. And then they had like a 15-second highlights of their exhibition, which I've never moved around an exhibition so quick in my life. Couldn't tell you what happened, but it was inaccessible. So picking out the wording like vulnerable person, a book ticket now, visit in person, book a time, all those sorts of things. The cookie page was a way to talk about that.
It was such a clever and wonderful way of making people feel something that they would not necessarily feel otherwise.
I just wanted to make a massive pain in the bum work.
and
it worked.
And you did it.
That was the crux of it. How can I make a piece on access that is really inaccessible? And I was struggling with a 2D collage to do that. So poor Chris and Gretchen, hats off to you for saying yes, because I just came out with this thing saying, well, I've made this weird box thing and it kind of works. Is this okay? So thank you for allowing me to do that.
No, I mean, thank you for and for sort of like all of you in general who were like, I can't do this topic the way I usually do. My piece has to be more. It has to be a triptych. It has to be bigger. It has to be a weird box thing. And I think that was one of the really exciting things about moderating this is I sort of left it pretty loose to the artists, like, oh, final project, whatever that means to you. And so then the stuff they came up with, I was like, in a million years, I never would have thought to myself, I'm going to make a weird box thing about accessibility. And it was brilliant. I mean, it was really, really just such a clever way. Once you allowed yourself that freedom to move off a 2D system and to make it interactive, I think you could tell that you just absolutely fell in love with it, and you knew where you were going. You knew how you were going to say what you had been searching for to say.
Yeah, definitely, because in like the 2D collage, and I did try digital as well to try like a layering technique, and it was just I was getting elements of what I wanted to say, but not everything. So I have never made a movable object with collage before, but that was a challenge, and I learned a lot along the way. Gosh, which was great. And I was really pleased with the final outcome. And it still works, but bits like drop off a little bit, and you get stuck when you move things, and some layers jar, and it's quite an interesting one.
I love that. Okay, we are going to, Christopher is my best friend because he always keeps me track of time because I always lose it. So thank you, Christopher. Thank you, artists. Let's move into the Q&A here. Let's see what ones I am missing. How long will the exhibition, oh, hi, Kathy. Kathy was another of our artists. How long will the exhibition be available online? Christopher, do you want to jump in on that one?
I think it's going to be up indefinitely. We don't really have any plans to take it down, and it speaks to the issues that Amanda was talking about. We obviously, the catalog is a beautiful artifact that everyone should have in their homes, but if you can't, then the online exhibition is there for you, and we want to leave it there for you.
Perfect. And I think someone else asked how to order the catalog. If you look in the, I want to say chat, Christopher put a link to order the catalog.
Yeah, if you, there's a link to the online exhibition, but on that page, there is a link to purchase the catalog as well. And also, Rick just wanted me to say that we are trying to bring this exhibition into other communities. So if someone knows of an institution that would like to host either part or whole of this exhibition, let us know and we'll try to make that happen. And then Karen Minahan just asked where the link to Amanda's work is. That is also on the online exhibition. If you find the picture of her work, you click on that. Each person's picture will take you to another page where you can see more of their work and also their statement about the work.
Perfect. Alex, someone actually asked if you would share the details of the
Oh yeah, I shared the link.
Perfect. Okay.
To the publisher page.
Anyone else who is watching? Do you have any questions for any of the specific artists? Any question about the residency? Any question, sort of broad questions about political art? We have our experts here.
I have a question, and this might be kind of putting all of you on the spot, but now that you've had a chance to see the exhibition and get the catalog in your hands, is there another artist's work that you feel inspired by that you would like to talk about a little bit that's maybe pushed you in a new direction?
None of you were inspired by each other's work. I find that hard to believe.
No, I was just gonna say I loved everyone's work, but I really got into Penny's.
Basically taking off your artist hat and putting on the audience hat for a moment.
Yeah. I really liked Penny's work, and I think it's because I use text in my work as well, so I could relate that way. And yeah, and it's really simple, and I really liked it because that's something I don't do like particularly well. So I really liked that about your work, and yeah, I just thought it was brilliant because I really like the strong backgrounds of your work, which I hadn't really seen before, especially in political collages, just a bold background with a central image. So yeah, I really like that. I loved everyone's, but those were just the things I picked up.
Yeah, I really like Kike Congrain's work from Peru. There's like really strong contrast of color. And then these like, I mean, this work that you're showing here is like this piece on colonialism and imperialism. And it's so like bright and colorful. It's almost at odds with like the subject matter, but the vibrancy of the colors, I think, is like, I don't know, it seems like indicative of like the joy that can remain after like an event like this. And I don't know, I mean, I think of like colors of certain flags. I just think it's a really striking work, just in terms of like how it's arranged in the color. And then also Nola Aboud from Lebanon, really strong like political imagery. That's on page 28. I've seen some of her other work. I think I'm following everyone on Instagram now. That's like a good way to stay in touch. And yeah, just appreciating. I think she had something on view in Greece recently. But she does this sort of work that is very intense and does not shy away from political imagery that is like sometimes pretty violent. Like I think there's some Guantanamo Bay imagery, but that's sort of like inspiring me to work in spaces that are not so comfortable, but then to also like reach out for a critique and to have you know, a few trusted folks like help me reflect on what I'm actually trying to say and if I'm successful or not. Like my initial piece was not successful, and there are ways in which I could see how an opposite reading could occur. And like that, it's when you're dealing with sensitive topics, you want to make sure that you're being very clear with what you're saying. So yeah, I've been inspired in some ways by Nola. Yeah.
I want to thank Amanda for her piece. We have something called the ADA, Americans with Disability Act, that just turned, what is it, 20 or 30 years old or something like that. And depending on where you are, you may not even know that law was passed. And someone once said, we are all only temporarily abled.
Mm.
And we should think about that when the bus driver stops and it takes longer for someone in a wheelchair to get on the bus and everybody's grumbling because they're going to be late, or why do we have to wait for that? Insert negative slur for person in wheelchair or whatever. And there's a whole consciousness raising is lagging about this because most of us assume that we are going to be able-bodied forever. And that's rare. Thank you.
Good point. Mary Hope, good point.
I'm very excited to see Amanda's work. I was able to take a preliminary look at everything, but I didn't really watch it, but now I'm excited to do that because I think it sounds fantastic, really, really terrific. And one of the things that I really liked from the magazine was Stephanie Todd Hunter's work. I love the humor that she brings to her statements, and she also does very big stuff. She prints them out really, really large. So yeah.
The only one we had to go over 2 pages because it was just too big.
Yeah.
In the best ways. If you don't mind, Penny, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to give a shout out to who you've been using as the, and I'm sorry, I think she was in our code. How do you pronounce her name?
Gaia Theory.
Gaia Theory. I just love how she integrates the text.
Yeah, and real quick, Gaia Theory is non-binary, so we use they and them.
Oh, sorry.
No,
How they, yes, I didn't look. Yes, I just love how they do it. The integration of the text and the color and just fantastic.
I really like these pieces. They line up with the work we've been with poetry and collage as well because of they've integrated the text. Yeah, there's some similarities there.
Yeah. Anyway.
Well, thank you. Answers. I'm glad I asked that question.
Yeah.
It's great. Karen asked, a couple of people mentioned political art being cringy. Do you have an example of that? What do you think about when you say that?
Karen, I hate to like throw anyone under the bus because on the one hand, I'm like, art is art. All art is great. If somebody's making art, awesome. I love it. I'm into it. What I was seeing that I was really struggling with was really quick art that people were making that was almost like a tweet, like what we were talking about before. It's quick and snappy and looks good on Instagram, but it's not really sparking dialogue or engaging conversation. So the example I always use is putting like a poop emoji symbol on a politician's head. Like, it's funny, right? It's funny, it's clever, you said your thing, people agree or disagree and move on. But what makes that cringy for me is it doesn't really do anything other than say, you either like this politician and agree, or you don't like this politician and disagree, and that's it. It doesn't really drive a conversation or engage people to think more about that politician or why they deserve the poop emoji or that. But personally, I don't want to throw any artists under the bus.
I also think about that documentary, I think it was Exit Through the Gift Shop on Banksy, where it's like, that's political art, and it's you can consume it very easily, and it's funny, but there's this artist there's a focus on in that documentary called Mr. Brainwash, who creates these like facsimiles of Banksy's art. So that's the sort of like reproduction without thought that just uses the imagery without consideration that is like a bit cringy as well. Like it's just when it's not really considered, I think.
I like that point. That's a good point.
And then Susan asked, have you had any negative experiences with reactions to your like art or posting your political views, threats, etc.? Susan is asking because they have, and it's very scary.
Anyone want to grab that one?
I have, although it was directed to the gallery, where a piece, it wasn't a collage piece, but it was a political piece. And I was accused of not being a patriot. And how could the gallery actually post the work, and that it was not, it was anti-American, and it wasn't it wasn't a physical threat to me or the gallery, but it was questioning whether the work had any legitimate reason to even be shown.
Did the gallery let you know that? Did they send you?
Yes, they did.
Oh, they did. Okay.
Yeah. They sent me a copy of it, which I have. Yeah. And it was anonymous, of course, right?
Of course. Has anyone else had that experience or similar?
I haven't, but I always worry about that with this piece, and you talked about that, Gretchen. That's, like, where do I have a right to make this kind of statement? So it's something I think about a lot,
Yeah.
But we're doing it anyway. We're out here putting that work out into the world, despite the real risk of people trying to shout us down. And I think it's worthwhile. Thank you all for being here today and talking about your work. Thank you, Gretchen, for leading us into this frontier and doing a lot of work on her end to put it all together. We are going to do another Politics and Collage residency in like November, December, maybe like halfway into this November, I think. We don't have all the details hammered out, but we should have the call to artists released by the end of August. And I think it's going to be a bit more focused. I think we're going to like pick a subject and try to like narrow in on a single one. So all of you were all sort of our guinea pigs for the Politics and Collage residency. So thank you for that as well. You will have the most freedom out of any Politics and Collage residencies, because we are definitely going to be a bit more restrictive going forward, just to make things a little bit easier, or maybe make it a little bit harder. I'm not sure. But I'm excited.
It's partly just sort of like, the logistics of it, right? I mean, as you can tell, as we're looking through these pictures, putting some of this work into a catalog to do this art justice is really difficult, just by nature of the size, or a box that moved, or that kind of thing. And that doesn't take away from the art. That doesn't take away from its brilliance and its need to be made, and how incredible that work is. It's just the logistics. How do we do justice to showing this art? And that's something Christopher and I really, and Rick as well, like really talked about, and really sort of were worried about, in terms of, honoring the artist's work. So this is not a bad thing that you guys were our guinea pigs. This was essentially like, oh my God, when we said make a project, they went in such a wonderful way. And the hardest thing for us was then, how do we show this to the world in a way that it really gets the idea and does the art justice. So I'm just gonna throw that out there. You're not guinea pigs in a bad way. It was a very positive way, but we want to make sure we can show this to the world in a good way. So Christopher, I'm so sorry I interrupted you there.
No, just say goodbye.
Okay, all right, sorry. I'm doing the Midwest exit. I'm gonna take 20 minutes to get off the phone.
Slap your knees, stand up, and say, well.
Thanks, Politics. It's been such an honor working with all these artists, and it's been such an honor, like, seeing their process and seeing their work and seeing what was frustrating and seeing how they worked through the frustrations, and just being able to do this. Cassini House, Collage Institute. Honestly, if you've got extra bones this year, I definitely recommend becoming a member, getting their quarterly magazine, becoming a silver glue scissors situation member, because they just do such incredible work. of bringing together collage artists, promoting collage, furthering the education and sort of the love of collage. So all the love to those guys, because this would not have been possible without them and without their support. And Christopher, thank you, my Buddha, for always keeping me calm and keeping things organized and saying when I'm like, I don't know what to do. And you're like, it's okay, namaste. And I'm like, namaste. I don't think you ever said namaste. I think I did. But thank you, because you did so much work to get this going as well. Thank you, attendees, for coming and hanging out with us on a Sunday and talking about politics. I know it's everybody's #1 favorite thing to do on a Sunday. So thank you for being here, and thank you for speaking, artists. Feel free, please look at the catalog, look at the online exhibition, reach out at any point with any questions for any of us, and we are always happy to stay in contact and stay in touch. I don't think I can drag out this goodbye any longer. So thank you, everyone. You are all amazing. Have a wonderful rest of your day. We'll see you soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.